In 2020, nearly 70% of American office workers stopped going to the office entirely. That single shift triggered the largest real estate redistribution in modern history, moving trillions of dollars worth of property value from city centers to suburbs, small towns, and places that barely registered on any investor's radar just 5 years earlier. This was not a temporary blip. This was a permanent restructuring of how and where human beings choose to live, and it happened faster than anything the real estate market had ever seen before. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to understand exactly how remote work rewrote the rules of real estate from the ground up. You will see which markets exploded, which ones collapsed, and why some of the most expensive zip codes in America are now bleeding value while towns you have never heard of are turning into gold mines. And stay with us, because the most counterintuitive part of this entire story is not what happened to housing prices, it is what happened to the people who thought they were making the smartest financial move of their lives. To understand where we ended up, you have to understand where we started. Before 2020, American real estate operated on one dominant principle: proximity to work equals value. The closer your home was to a major employment hub, the more it was worth. That was the rule. Cities like San Francisco, New York, Seattle, and Boston commanded premium prices specifically because millions of workers needed to be within commuting distance of their offices. A one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco averaged over $3,000 a month in rent. A modest single-family home in a suburb of Manhattan could run you close to $1 million, not because the home itself was extraordinary, but because of the jobs nearby. Location was everything. Location was the entire game. Then the pandemic happened, and in the span of roughly 6 weeks, that fundamental rule became completely irrelevant for tens of millions of people. When your office is your laptop, proximity to a downtown tower means absolutely nothing. And when people realized that freedom was not temporary, that their employer was not calling them back next month or even next year, they started asking a question that had never really been on the table before. Why am I paying this much to live here? The answer, for millions of Americans, was that they no longer had a good reason to. And they moved. Between 2020 and 2022, the United States experienced a domestic migration wave unlike anything recorded since the post-World War II suburban boom. The numbers are staggering. Boise, Idaho saw home prices jump over 47% in a single year. Austin, Texas absorbed so many transplants that its population grew by roughly 170 people every single day at its peak. Smaller markets like Spokane, Washington, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Greenville, South Carolina suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with buyers who had sold their coastal homes for massive profits and were arriving with cash in hand, ready to pay over asking price on properties that locals could not compete with. But here is what nobody talks about when they tell the feel-good migration story. Those incoming buyers, the remote workers flush with coastal equity, fundamentally changed the economic DNA of every town they entered. Local residents, teachers, nurses, firefighters, the people who actually kept those communities running, found themselves priced out of the very places they had lived their entire lives. In Boise, the median home price went from around $270,000 in early 2020 to over $500,000 by mid-2022. The average Boise salary did not double. Not even close. So the remote work revolution created two simultaneous and completely opposite crises at the same time. It made housing unaffordable in the cities that people were leaving, because landlords and sellers held firm on prices longer than anyone expected. And it made housing unaffordable in the destinations, because the incoming buyers were operating with a completely different financial baseline than the existing residents. Now let us talk about what happened on the commercial side, because this is where the numbers get truly alarming. Office vacancy rates in major American cities hit levels not seen since the savings and loan crisis of the late 1980s. By 2023, San Francisco's downtown office vacancy rate had climbed to over 30%. That is nearly 1 in 3 office buildings sitting either empty or dramatically underutilized. In Manhattan, over 90 million square feet of office space was sitting vacant, a figure so large it is genuinely difficult to visualize. For context, that is roughly equivalent to every office building in the entire city of Chicago sitting empty simultaneously. This matters for real estate far beyond commercial property values, because commercial real estate is deeply tied to municipal tax revenues. When office buildings lose value, cities collect less property tax. When they collect less property tax, they have less money for schools, infrastructure, and public services, which makes those cities less attractive to residents, which drives more people out, which reduces the residential tax base. You can see how this becomes a very difficult cycle to break. Some cities began exploring the obvious solution, converting empty office buildings into residential housing. New York City announced major incentives for commercial to residential conversions. Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles followed with their own programs. The concept makes intuitive sense. You have empty buildings where people are not working, and you have a housing shortage where people cannot afford to live. Connect the dots. But the reality of conversion is far more complicated than it sounds. Most office buildings from the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s were not designed with residential living in mind. The floor plates are too deep, meaning the interior rooms would have no windows. The plumbing infrastructure is completely wrong. The electrical systems need full replacement. A conversion that sounds simple on paper can easily cost more per square foot than building a brand new residential tower from the ground up. Cities are learning this the hard way. But here is the deeper insight that most mainstream coverage of this story completely misses. Remote work did not just change where people wanted to live. It fundamentally changed what they wanted from a home. Before 2020, the average American home search was optimized around commute time, school district quality, and square footage. Those factors still matter. But after 2 or 3 years of working from home, an entirely new set of priorities emerged with serious purchasing power behind them. Dedicated office space went from a luxury to a near requirement. Outdoor space, previously a nice-to-have, became a deal-breaker for millions of buyers. Proximity to nature, hiking trails, lakes, mountains, became a genuine competitive advantage for smaller markets that had never been able to compete with cities on any prior metric. This shift in preference changed the product that home builders needed to deliver. The largest home builders in the country, companies like D.R. Horton, Lennar, and Pulte Group, pivoted their floor plan offerings within 18 months of the pandemic start. Studies from the National Association of Home Builders showed that demand for homes with dedicated home office rooms increased by over 60% compared to pre-pandemic surveys. Builders who adapted quickly captured enormous market share. Those who kept building pre-pandemic layouts struggled to move inventory. And now we arrive at where we are today, which is genuinely complicated. Remote work did not end. It evolved. Fully remote positions declined somewhat from their 2020 peak, but hybrid work, the model where employees come in 2 or 3 days a week, became the dominant arrangement for knowledge workers across the economy. And hybrid work created a strange middle ground for real estate. People want to be close enough to the office for a Tuesday commute, but far enough out that they can afford a decent home with a yard. That sweet spot, roughly 1 to 2 hours outside a major metro area, became the most competitive real estate environment in the country. Towns that nobody had ever considered as bedroom communities for major cities suddenly found themselves absorbing suburban demand from 60 or 80 miles away. The long-term implications of all this are still unfolding. Remote and hybrid work permanently expanded the geography of the American housing market. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Flash Trend for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.